the director of the Cowlitz County Historical Museum, and I guess you're interested in hearing about, UFO stuff and plane crashes and surface collection archaeology, and we're going to cover a little bit of all of that here in this program tonight. And I'm not necessarily an expert on all this stuff, but I've been learning a bit as I go, and some of you may have some knowledge to share as well regarding this program. And I look forward to any discussion that happens after we get through with this. Two quick announcements. One of them is on November 2nd is our annual membership meeting, and so that is on a Sunday at noon. We will have our Mexican party platter lunch and a program with Debbie Ethel, who is just wrote a book called Elephant Mountain, which is about a person who had elephants over in Woodland. And I've been talking about her program for quite some time, but there was a lot of delays in her book being published, and it has finally gotten published, so we are good to go. So we'll see you here on the 2nd of November, which is Sunday. One other final announcement. Actually, I just want to give some kudos to our wonderful staff here, to Danielle Robbins and Joanna Rowland, who helped manage this tech issue that happened about 35 minutes ago, where I thought I could easily transfer the PowerPoint presentation from my computer to the laptop so it could be on the screen. Done it hundreds of times, and all of a sudden all kinds of stuff went haywire and it wouldn't communicate, and they both aggressively thought on their feet and got this fixed for us, so I appreciate them. So let's give them a round of applause, because they're awesome staff and they troubleshot the problem, and we are only delayed by a few minutes here. I was afraid I was going to have to find some alternate program here, which is not the program you came here for, so I didn't want to have a full house of angry people here. I do want to give also quick thanks and shout out to Don Davenport. Where are you? There you are. He loaned me this book about the topic that we'll be talking about tonight, and I had a chance to quickly breeze through it in the last 36 hours, and I pulled some information from the book and put it in here into the program. You can find it on Amazon. It's about $20, and it has a lot of details about the Maury Island Incident that we're here to go over tonight. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the program here. So October is Washington State Archaeology Month, so we wanted to acknowledge this program because it involved a archaeological permit to collect surface material from the crash site over outside of Rose Valley. And archaeology is basically putting together human culture based on whatever artifacts that we can find, and artifacts are objects that are made by humans or modified by humans. So even this pen, anything you handle is an artifact. The speaker is an artifact. Artifacts don't mean old objects, they're just any object that a human has manipulated. In Washington State, though, they consider anything 50 years or older as a historical artifact, so then it can become part of an archaeological site. That's a fairly low threshold, but out here in Western states and in the United States of America, we tend to have variations between 50 and 100 years determine something to be a historical archaeological site. So your classic car parked in your garage could be a historical artifact now. In Europe, though, they'll consider things that are 200 years old as just junk. And anybody who's been to Europe, you walk by old Roman ruins and things like that, they see that stuff every day. So, archaeology, of course, you have your traditional, I need the laser pointer. Danielle, can you grab the laser pointer for me, which is in the closet, I believe. Traditionally you see people in a pit digging, but there's grave archaeology, there's maritime archaeology shown here. These are some posters from past archaeological months. urban archaeology. Some archaeologists dig through rubbish heaps because you can learn a lot about people digging through their trash, just as if you do somebody's tax return, you know pretty much what they've been up to, where they've been following. You just follow the money, you see where they're spending, there we go, where they spend their money and how they're living their lives. Interestingly enough, I'm a subscriber to National Geographic magazine, and there was an article about space archaeology, and there's a whole bunch of early space satellites that were launched in the very late 1950s and early 1960s that are either still in orbit around Earth or they're in a solar orbit around the sun. And it's a short article, and I just put the cover here, so if you see this in the store, you might consider picking it up. And there's just about a 3-page or so article about various satellites that some people have an interest in. Maybe do we go up and grab them and bring them back down now that they've been up there for 65, 70 years. Okay, so we're here to talk about the B-25 bomber that crashed outside of Kelso. North American Aviation in Kansas City started manufacturing these B-25 medium bombers. In 1941, they are designed to carry about a 3,000-pound payload of bombs right here in their belly. Anybody ever been inside an old World War II bomber? Walked through one, maybe a static display at an air show? You see them in movies, and they look really big on the screen on the inside, but I kind of consider them as submarines of the sky because they're really tight inside. The width of this aircraft is not even as wide as a modern automobile. Like if you drove an SUV over here, it is probably wider than this aircraft. And the bomb bay was designed where you would actually have to, the people in the front, in order to get to the back, there was a little tunnel here, and you would climb through the tunnel to get to this back area, and then there was a gunner door on the side, on both sides, and then you can go further into the back to the tail gunner position. My grandfather flew these during World War II. This was the most common aircraft he flew in the Pacific Theater. Here's a schematic of the B-25. I found this and took this out into the field with us just in case we found anything that was large that we could match. We did not find anything large. Most of the stuff we found, in fact, what you see here on the table is the largest of the items that we found. I've always loved old military warbirds, and this is, gosh, about 20 years ago. I got to fly on a B-25. This is down in California with my then girlfriend, and here I am about 3,000 feet up in it. This picture is actually taken in a B-17, looking out the window at the props, again about 3,000 feet up. This B-17 is known as the 909, and it crashed in 2019 with passengers on board. About 7 people died during this crash. These aircraft are getting older and older. The crash that we're talking about is about 78 years old. So all these aircraft that were built, and they stopped building them in 1945. Once the war ended, they shut down production on all the war material. So anything you have there is at least 80 years old now or older, 80, 90 years old. And so I remember them talking about, this, like I said, is about 15 years ago. The certification to fly these aircraft, it's harder and harder to get them certified as they get older and older, and at some point they will become static displays. So that's why I wanted to fly on one while I had the opportunity to do so. The B-25, if you haven't heard of them before, something you should be very well aware of is the importance that they had early on in the American involvement with World War II. Because after Pearl Harbor, our morale was low. As a country, we were angered and ready to fight, and we had the tooling and the industrial capacity to fight, but the Japanese Empire was still expanding through the Pacific, and we needed to strike back and let the Japanese Empire know that they were not safe in their home islands. And so there was this plan to strike Tokyo, to let them know at least that we could hit them. And so the Jimmy Doolittle raid from April of 1942 was created, where we put 16 of these B-25 bombers, which were brand new bombers back then, onto an aircraft carrier. And I think it's just fantastic that we were able to pack them on and actually launch them off of an aircraft carrier. These are not lightweight fighters. And 16 of them went out over to Tokyo, and we had to launch earlier than planned because our fleet had been spotted. And so the original plan was to do a trip out and then land in China, but they went out and crashed in the sea, crashed in China. One of them, I think, made it to the Soviet Union. There was only one aircraft that survived. I think it's the one that made it to the Soviet Union. So it was a one-way mission for these pilots. So I just wanted to just remind everybody, when you say B-25, think about that Doolittle raid and the boost of morale that it gave to the Americans early on in the war when it was most needed. The strike in Japan did not do anything crippling, but it shook them up enough to know that, oh my gosh, we actually do need to have air defenses here in Tokyo, in our homeland. Okay, a little background information now. The UFO craze of 1947. So this all kind of kicks in with Kenneth Arnold. And this all happened in Washington State. That's the really interesting thing here, is Kenneth Arnold, who was flying over by Mount Rainier on June 24th, which is actually 3 days after this incident, but his incident was the first one that really made it into the mainstream news. And so this kind of started this UFO craze of 1947, where he reportedly saw some 9 UFOs flying by Mount Rainier. He was going from, where he was flying from Chehalis to Yakima, and he diverted to go up towards Rainier a little ways because he was going to look for a wreckage of a transport aircraft that there was a reward for. Didn't see it and started coming back around, and then noticed these 9 objects out there and reported it. But that wasn't the only one, though. Of course, we had the Maury Island Incident from 3 days before that did not make it into the news immediately. And Kenneth Arnold thought that these vehicles that he saw, or these objects that he saw, were going about 1,200 miles per hour based on his estimate. A little bit later, on July 4th, Flight 105, which was a DC-3, a twin-engine civilian commercial aircraft, was going from Boise to Pendleton, and the pilots and the flight attendants saw several objects as well, possibly saucers. And they tried kind of following a bearing on them for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then they disappeared. They accelerated or went too high or something. They just shot off and were gone. There was also, and in our temporary gallery, as part of our traveling exhibit, the State Archives put together an exhibit called Beyond Browsing the Stacks, which is kind of the greatest hits of Washington State history, and it has elements of industry and agriculture and culture in our state, and that's in our temporary gallery, so please go take a look at that. But we do have, as part of that, it does have the Kenneth Arnold story in there. And then here's a few pictures during that UFO mass sightings of 1947. July 7 are these 2 pictures taken by a gentleman named Rhodes down in Arizona, and then the spots up there were observed over Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then the Roswell incident happened around July 8th, and you guys are all pretty familiar with that, the alleged UFO crash and possible bodies found. So also at this time, the beginning of the Cold War starts to set in with the Truman Doctrine, and we have, we are the only nuclear power at the time, but Truman starts to want to contain communism, and we have, there's some incidences here from after 1947, the 1948 Berlin airlift. We were testing atomic weapons and marching soldiers into the field towards the fallout. This aircraft here, the B-36 Peacemaker, is the world's largest bomber ever built. It's got 6 pusher propellers and 2 twin pods of jets, like a B-52. They look like B-52 jets, so it's got 4 jets and 6 pushers. It's our first intercontinental strategic bombers, meaning that it can fly out of the United States and then strike targets in the Soviet Union and then come back to the United States. It's not a one-way journey. The Soviets only had one-way journey bombers at the time. So there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, and as such, the United States is also launching a lot of measures to try to measure if the Soviets were going to build a nuclear weapon. We knew it. In 1949, they did achieve that goal, but in 1947, we were putting up sensors and things using these high altitude balloons, and so there's been some theory that maybe in 1947, some of these sightings could have been weather balloons or experimental aircraft, as we were well into the jet age, experimental time too. So, the Maury Island Incident, where this begins. Again, this is a copy of that book. I recommend picking it up if you get a chance. It's been really entertaining to read and a lot of information in it. And an artist's depiction of what this incident looked like with these 6 saucers that were hovering around South Puget Sound. To give you a little bit of geographic understanding here. So here's Tacoma and Vashon Island, and Maury Island is right next to it. They're actually connected. They're called tide islands. They're connected by something called a tombolo. A tombolo is a patch of land connecting 2 islands, or an island to a piece of mainland that is not really solid land. It's more like beach type land, and it can flood or get covered by tides at times. But so Maury Island, if you look on a map, it looks like it is not an island, but more of a peninsula off of Vashon Island, but it's technically an island, and here's a closer view of it. So here's Commencement Bay and South Puget Sound down in here. McChord Field, which is now Joint Base Lewis-McChord, is right down here, just south of Tacoma. So what happened here, Harold Dahl, who was operating a vessel, was doing what he called a patrol. They would go out and look for, I guess, derelict logs that logging companies would float through, and sometimes the logs would come loose. If they were marked, you can get a reward for the logs. So he was out there just patrolling around with this vessel with a couple crewmen, his son, and their dog. And he claims to have seen 6 donut-shaped flying objects flying overhead. He saw, according to his words in the book, one of them started descending in altitude. They were about 2,000 feet up, and one started descending. The other 5 were kind of hovering around it and descending 50 feet, 100 feet above it as it was going down. It seemed to have some kind of mechanical problem and started it stopped about 500 feet directly above the boat, and they were really close to the island, and started dumping material out. And the material was described as if thousands and thousands of newspapers were coming out of the center of the disc, and then followed by that, some very hot black lava-like rock started dumping out and into the water, and when it hit the water, steam would rise. The boat was hit, and some of it went onto the beach too, and the dog was apparently killed by the impacts of this material, and Dahl's son was injured. And so his son was taken to the hospital in Tacoma upon returning. They gathered what they could of these hot rocks and newspaper-like material. The newspaper-like material turned out to be some kind of a very thin metal. And they estimated about 20 tons of material may have hit the beach at Maury Island. And the Maury Island, the boat, and the water. About a day later, though, there's a couple firsts in this story here. One of them is this is the first kind of modern UFO sighting description. The second first is this is the first sighting of the men in black that show up, that want to have a chat with you and want you to be quiet about what you saw. And so this whole idea of these men in black clad suits coming around, that starts with this story here. The third one is the first crash of the United States Air Force, which I'll get into when we get more into the crash of the aircraft. So some things I'm a little unclear about, and some of you in the audience may know a little bit more, but the material ended up in the hands of the government. It was collected by Fred Chrisman, who was Dahl, the boat operator's boss on the patrol. And because this originally happened June 21st, but this is all early now July, some time has passed. And so these other stories are coming out. And so they contacted Ken Arnold from the June 24th incident and contacted the pilot, E.J. Smith from United Airlines Flight 105, which had an incident on July 4th, also in Washington State, where they apparently saw several objects and weren't sure what they were. And they, through their networks of people that they knew, they were able to contact the 4th Air Force at Hamilton Field in Northern California, and they sent Lieutenant Brown and Captain Davidson to investigate. And they met at a hotel and they collected fragments, and then they went off to McChord Field with the material. Some theories to explain this situation of the dropped material and what it could have been, which I found in this book, which I thought was an interesting one, is that it could have been actually a cover-up story, because Hanford Nuclear Site was enriching uranium and creating nuclear waste, and these are the early days of all this plutonium and uranium enrichment, and they need to get rid of it. And back in the 40s, people would just take stuff to the lake and dump it, or take it to the river and dump it. This was a common thing that was done. So one of the theories was that the military may have been flying out to the Pacific Ocean and dumping this material that they didn't want anymore, and that perhaps one of the aircraft was having problems and had to dump its cargo prematurely into the Sound, and that this could have been such cargo. So here's, there was a short movie made. I don't know if anybody heard about the Maury Island Incident short film, but that was made about 10 years ago. And I haven't seen it yet, but I'd like to, maybe we can show it here some night. I have to figure out how to obtain it. And then there's a diagram here somebody had drawn of what this Maury Island incident could have looked like. So the Washington State Senate actually did pass a resolution in 2017 acknowledging the Maury Island incident and the unusual circumstances around it. And if you go on the web, on Google, and look up Washington State Senate 2017 Maury Island Incident, you'll be able to pop this up. Resolution 6848. There's lots of resolution 6848s out there, by the way, but resolution 6848 from 2017 is what you're going to be looking for. And it kind of outlines all these different circumstances, including the pilots that died in the B-25 crash. Okay, military investigation from California to Washington. So again, some geographic familiarity here. Hamilton Field is in Novato, right here in Northern California. Here's just a little bit of, San Francisco's right down there. The North Bay part, San Pablo Bay here. San Francisco Bay is gonna be down in here. And here's Point Reyes. And if you look at it on a Google map, you'll see a long line there. That's the San Andreas Fault, which creates Point Reyes, pointing out there's a little inland stretch of water right down this little crack here. And that's where, this is the part where Los Angeles will eventually come up and join San Francisco when we're no longer around. And so Hamilton Field is located right there. So that's where the two investigators came from. So Captain William Lee Davidson is on the left, and First Lieutenant Frank M. Brown is on the right. They were the two investigators, pilots that flew the B-25 up from Hamilton Field. And this crash, as I mentioned before, is the first United States Air Force crash. We had the United States Army Air Force before. And then on the 1st of August 1947, the United States Air Force was separated from the United States Army and became its own entity. So this happened on Air Force Day. So they took the materials and got to their aircraft. The aircraft left on a nighttime flight, leaving at about 2:12 a.m. They departed McChord Field. And at 2:30 in the morning, a Kelso patrolman, John Walring, observed the bomber on fire and crash, and he observed the plane spiral into a dive. There were two other people on the aircraft too, Sergeant Elmer Taft and Sergeant Woodrow Matthews. Woodrow Matthews was the crew chief of the aircraft. He and Elmer Taft survived. In fact, here they are. And the interesting part is that Elmer Taft was just a passenger ferrying back to Texas. He was on getting his leave, and he was going to go back home to Texas, so he was just hitching a ride on the airplane. He had never flown in an aircraft before. And so Sergeant Matthews, the crew chief, set him up with a parachute and got him out the door, told him what to do and pull the ripcord and all that. So he's never used a parachute, never been on an airplane before, and he lands and is unharmed. He lands several miles from the crash site, and he had to cross about 200 yards of farmland and went to a farmhouse and retrieved help, where they took him into Kelso. Sergeant Woodrow Matthews, who was more experienced, was injured upon landing, and he had noticed sparks flying around the bomb bay before the crash, and he also saw the left engine on fire. And some accounts recall that there was a streak of fire coming off the engine when it was flying overhead over Kelso, and accounts that the wing had fallen off. When they were loading the aircraft at McChord, it was noted that there was some kind of a heavy strong box that they were putting in, and the material inside was extremely heavy, and there was a lot of extra security there. And here's a page from the Kelsonian Tribune, which we have right there that you can take a look at, and this is from August 7th, so it's 6 days later. So it's got actually some more information in there, because some days had passed where they got has speculation on how the aircraft crashed or what caused the malfunction on it. So I have that open there that you can take a look at. But we also have in the Daily News here that 2 reported killed in the crack up on Goble Creek, and and there's a picture there on the front page of the wreck, and they make several references in multiple newspapers about the mysterious cargo, mysterious circumstances about what was on that aircraft. Something I had learned from the book is that there was a journalist named Paul Lance who was a Tacoma Times reporter, and he was an investigative reporter, a young man. He was about 29 years old. He suspected the bomber might have been sabotaged. He interestingly died 6 months after the wreck. So that was just several circumstances that are unusual around this whole business with this crash. We have a few pictures from our archives I was able to find too. We have this first photograph is the Air Force crew that was sent to collect the wreckage of the downed B-25. Our information here says this is up by the Goble Creek area, up the Cowlitz River on August 1st. This is the secondary recovery effort in 1948. Photos of the crew standing outside their jeeps along the dirt road up the Cowlitz River. So after the plane crashed and they did the initial, investigations on it and all that, there was another effort made about a year later in 48 to actually remove most of the material. So most of the big stuff is gone. And Don, by the way, is in the audience here. His grandfather and his father were among the first people that arrived on scene and came across the left wing, I believe, on your way up to the crash site. It was laying up against a big fir tree, and the reports I've had is between 300 and 500 yards away from the main crash. So, and you were not around, but your father was 15 at the time. And so there's some written accounts from what he had seen. Here's a few more pictures from our archive. Let me see. I got my notes. Smashed. So here you can see the landing gear here. They haven't picked up any of the debris yet. I'm assuming all these light colored materials was the aluminum and bits from the airplane. And it crashed into 3 trees, like at the base of 3 trees. And then here, these are men hauling a water pump up the hill. It says here, crew bringing a water pump up to the site. Weyerhaeuser logging railroad tracks are in the background. The writing on the back of the picture says pulling a water pump uphill to pump water out of the hole that the B-25 had left. So where this aircraft crashed, it created an impact crater right here. And it filled with water because there's a little tiny, I'm gonna call it a stream. I always wondered the difference between river, creek, stream, and I think a brook. A brook you can step over, and a creek you can wade through, and I think a river you have to swim across. But it's very narrow, anywhere from as narrow as a foot to 2 or 3 feet in some wider areas. It's a small little brook, and that impact crater is right by it, and that's where it filled with the water, and that's where we found these materials, is up that little brook or stream. And they had to bring heavy dozer equipment in, and then also the dozer got stuck, and they had to bring a second one in to pull it out. This is on Weyerhaeuser land now, and the area there has probably been logged twice over in the last 78 years. So, every time years go by and trees grow and get harvested and heavy equipment's going through there, stuff is getting churned and mixed and crushed, and then you have souvenir hunters that were going in there decades ago finding stuff. So the place gets picked pretty clean, but it's amazing how even when it's picked, there's still stuff out there. It's very thick vegetation there. In fact, we're going to show you some pictures of what happened when we went out there. So we applied for a permit with the Department of Archaeology and Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. This is the first time I've ever applied for one of these permits, and of course you need permission from the landowner, so we had to talk to Weyerhaeuser first to see if we could even get onto the property, explain what we were going to do, and get their blessings to recover the material if we found anything. And once we had that, we can then go to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation and fill out the permit. And also in our temporary gallery, this is a picture of one of the display cases, which has the first fragment that we had from the crash that we got back in 2007 that was given to us. So that's how I learned about this whole airplane crash and site in Maury Island. We had this chunk of metal in our archives, and I started just digging deeper and learning more about what it was affiliated with. And so we were going out into the middle of nowhere, and so we left Joanna, our office manager, directions of, here's where we're going to be, and here's when we expect to be back, and if you don't hear from us, here's the people you need to call from Weyerhaeuser, number 1, and here's the number 2 person to call if you can't reach number 1. And so we left before she came into the office, and we realized, oh gosh, we should let her know where we're at. So when she showed up at our workstation, this was sitting here waiting for her, so that she would be our rescuer if we needed to be rescued. And we're heading out there, and got lucky with some nice weather, although the vegetation had grown quite a bit because we had a lot of spring rains. Bill had been out there the year before on August 1st, the anniversary of the crash, and the vegetation wasn't quite as intense, he recalled. And there's ticks out there too. I got 2 ticks on me after I got home. And this is Bill at the what we believe to be the impact crater. And again, it's just completely overgrown with brush. And then this is on our second expedition out 2 weeks later. Bill and I went out first, and then Bill, Danielle, me, and Maggie, Bill's wife, came out. And so there they are. And then that's a little bit of the water underneath part of the crater area. This tree is not the same tree that's in those black and white pictures. This is a much smaller tree. This one fell a lot later. So we really relied on a compass and a laser distance finder, and Public Works loaned these to us. And it was a little difficult trying to get the readings because, again, it was so thick out there that we would try to shoot it at a tree and it would measure it, but then there was all kinds of foliage. So sometimes we had to take multiple measurements and get the closest that we could get using it. And Public Works loaned us both of these devices here. In fact, Chad from Public Works is here, right there in the back row, right? There he is, calling you out. Thank you. And the only map we really had was this 1948 map, or possibly 47 map, showing the crash site and basic information. This mountain stream here is Gobel Creek, and I have it reversed on purpose so that that's north, that's south, east, west, so it corresponds with how we would normally imagine a map, but this was drawn upside down. And so main crash sites there, and they put X's where they found major pieces and debris. And then these are our 2 paths that we measured to try to figure out where everything was and how far everything was and what relation it was. And we had no scale here, so we didn't know exactly how big it was. It says here 500 yards to the left wing right here, but even if you divided that up, we weren't too sure of that, how accurate. But then when I looked at it, we had pieces of engine and nacelle, and the nacelle is the covering over an engine, or nacelle is like on the Starship Enterprise, has 2 long projections on the back of the vessel are nacelles. They cover and streamline an engine. And so that became kind of important because we found some debris. This is that other map superimposed to what I believe to be true scale. So our map covered about 43 meters of distance. And so there's probably all kinds of material out there, but it's just so thick with ferns and vegetation, and there's stinging nettle all over there too. Lots of stinging nettle. So it's a little bit treacherous out there. But that helped show that we were on the right track because our map actually kind of corresponded with their map of debris and where we felt the stream was. And here's a couple more shots of us out in the field. And this is how stuff would be found. When because it was so thick, the best place to find everything was around that stream bed. And so this right here is this piece right here. So we're just looking around trying to find anything that was metallic. We did bring metal detectors with us, and our permit was for surface collection, so we were not to dig in the ground, but only just pull things off that we could find. But even with the metal detectors, with the thick foliage, you can't just wave it around that easily when the brush is that thick. But the metal detectors were popping off all kinds of readings, but we were really using our eyes the most. So we would walk by, we would find stuff, and then we would flag it, and then we'd come back and collect it. This piece we found on the second excursion. We originally thought it was like burlap or something like that, but it's actually fiberglass. And this was just sitting in the dirt, partially exposed, and so we pulled it out, and we don't know what that was for. We haven't had a chance to analyze any of the stuff or take it to an expert that does restorations on B-25s, which is my intention to contact some of these organizations that do restoration work on old aircraft, especially the B-25. And we found this piece of rubber here, which we suspect is either part of the tire or part of the inner tube. And this was right by the creek too. And it was found in location near the nacelle, which on the B-25, the landing gears pull up under the nacelles right behind where the engines are. So that original map showed some engine debris in the nacelle, and then if we're finding pieces of rubber there, then I'm suspecting that's, and it's consistent in the location, that's probably what it is. Here's another piece here, and we actually have that on display here. It's got that army green color paint on it. Right there, just found in situ right there, and then in the lab there. And some pieces were underwater or mostly underwater. This one, there's a lot of reflection here, but there's crumpled aluminum here, and it's sticking out just a little bit here. This is a different piece that it would have looked like a rock, but you can see there's a couple lines here that indicate there's a piece of aluminum. It was subjected to heat and burned, and then there's a little bit of rust here from a iron or metal rivet or something that was holding it together. Other than that, it looks like a rock, but it's actually metal. And then one of the larger pieces we found right here was stuck in the creek by a log. And then this is the only piece that had, well, the piece of fiberglass had a marking on it too, but this is the only metal piece that had some kind of a maker's stamp mark on it, which I'm hoping we can find more information about that, what that is. And this piece too, I'm hoping we can find where this came from on the aircraft. And again, here's the nacelle behind the engine and the wheel. And nearby that piece of rubber is this piece of metal, and it's buried in the ground. We were not able to pull it out. It's just too deep in there. This has been there for almost 80 years. The impact and the speed probably buried it already, plus all the vegetation and any logging activities going on. But these pieces are symmetric here. This piece in this shape, they don't look like it in the picture because it's a little distorted the way that the piece is bent, but they match. And I suspect this might be landing gear, and then there's pieces of aluminum that are attached to it that we tried tugging on it, but it's firmly attached to this piece that is deeply anchored into the earth. Weyerhaeuser says that they can help us remove it because it's right into the water here and would require earth removal. There's all kinds of environmental protections on it, and so they have specialists that can come and take this piece out. So I'm very curious when it does come out, how big is it, and does it tell us a little bit more, because that will be the biggest piece that we will be able to recover. And I want to give a special thanks to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation for granting us the permit. The permit is good for 1 year and it expires in November of this year, so I'm hoping to get out there one more time. Cowlitz County Public Works was awesome. They gave us hard hats and vests and all the technical equipment to use. We're very, very accommodating. In fact, all of the county departments that I've ever asked for help from have always been very cooperative with the museum, because we are not just a nonprofit organization, the Cowlitz County Historical Society, but we operate this museum as a partnership with Cowlitz County. So we are a public and private partnership, and anytime I go to the public entity to ask for help for anything, they've always been very accommodating. So I just really appreciate my fellow county colleagues. Also want to thank Weyerhaeuser for being so gracious to let us onto their land and snoop around and take some of the items off, because they very easily could have just said no, as anybody can. It's private property, and it's their will, what they want to do, and they were more than accommodating to us in giving us access, so I'm very thankful for them. And with that, I think we can just open up the floor to comments, questions, observations, insights. Anybody have, Dawn, do you have any more insights or information off the top of your head? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
The only thing my dad remembered is once they got up there, the ground was still on fire. There's a gasoline soaked into the ground. And because of that, the two bodies that the pilots were really burnt beyond recognition. And it got to me. It's really upsetting.
I think the co-pilot, his body was dismembered his torso was found farther away from the aircraft. His torso was ejected from the aircraft. And so, and there was a fire, and there was an explosion and burning there, and there was a small fire, or small forest fire, I think, that happened as a result of that crash. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
Anyone ever play with any Geiger counters out there to see if there's any radioactivity?
I wondered about that too, because of the mystery about the cargo on the aircraft, and whatever was with that aircraft went down with it. And if the military didn't recover it, it's still out there. And I didn't know if Bill and I would show up, glowing or something, or what, but or if we would find something like that thing that looked like a rock, but it was metal and it looked like it was burned. What if it wasn't? What if it was part of that mystery cargo? But yeah, I think Geiger counters would be an interesting thing to bring out there, just to see if there's any stuff 80 years later, if there was, let's say this material actually was plutonium, that plutonium waste. I would imagine the half-life of it would still be strong on a Geiger counter, just only 80 years later, since that stuff takes, 5,000 years to break down.
So did the government ever come out and look for anything after the crash, or they just left it there?
They came out immediately after the crash, and then in 1948 they did a major cleanup a year later to pull all the material out. So it's not like we would find, like the left wing, I think they probably took that. Anything large was taken.
So any of the stuff that was the cargo, they took that?
I would
Okay.
assume that
Yeah.
99.9% chance if it was there, they got that, unless it was somehow buried somewhere deep or ejected somewhere really, really far. There was a, yes?
Yeah, do you guys have access to the, like to the Air Force investigation? Because this is their first investigation as an entity, and it seems like they might, we might be able to, get, maybe it's been declassified, I don't know, but that investigation, do you know of what the status of that is, or?
I actually, Harv, I actually thought about that too, because I did have to contact the Air Force because it was an Air Force bomber and U.S. property.
Right.
I had to notify them at least that what we were doing. And in my research of who do I notify, it was at Wright-Patterson Air Base was the place I had to contact, was where their archives were. But I never asked them further than just say, here's what we're doing. But I should follow up on that trail and call somebody and talk to them and say, who has all the Air Force records, because there's a crash, I want to get more information. If there's a transcript of this particular crash.
I think there's a chapter in the book on that. They show part of the Air Force investigation.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
And they said it was just mechanical problems.
Yeah.
They worked on the engine, the left wing engine, before it left McChord. And they said one of the exhaust pipes came loose and caused flames going into the wing and stuff. That's their reason.
That'd be kind of interesting to have, to have that initial, the report as part of our.
It'd be nice to include that there too, yeah. And I'm sure that Air Force report would be pretty, like it's not going to talk about any of the more sensationalized aspects of it. It'll be kind of like what you just said here. There was an exhaust port that came loose and shot hot gas into the wing and
I
engine.
gotta fix that.
Yeah. Yes,
Did
Sandy.
they say how much the plane actually burned? Was it all of it or just portions of it? Was it
I'm
landed
not-
into the water or something too? I'm just wondering if it's.
I'm assuming, I don't have the answer to that unless somebody else here does, but I would assume that anything at the main crash hole was probably burned. I mean, we're just finding splinters, and these pieces are all mangled. So
Yeah.
it like exploded in multiple pieces. So, and there's, some burn evidence on some of them, but I think it probably burned for a while with all the fuel there, and there's all the woods there, and it was April 1st, so it was probably dry, I'd imagine, at that time. That's a good time to have a
April
fire.
1st or
Pardon me?
April 1st?
I'm sorry, August 1st. It was
Okay.
August 1st. Yeah, there's a whole different story around these parts in wetness and dryness. Yeah, so so there's a lot of, I'm hoping that with everybody in this room and any interest in this, that if you all dig deeper and look deeper and consider this book as a starting point of finding more information out there about this wreck and the mystery around it, because it connects us with the story up to Puget Sound, just like the Cowlitz corridor connects us to Puget Sound. So there's a lot of these interconnections to these areas. My family's down in the Bay Area, and I would love to talk about this to the Historical Society in Novato. I looked them up. They have one there, and they have a speaker series. And as I learn more and can refine this, I'd love to share this with them. They may even have some information about it because the aircraft originated from there. So they might have some kind of record.
How old was the plane?
How old was the plane? It was 1947, and they built them from 41 to 45, so it was, I would call it a new plane. It was a $150,000 airplane back in those dollars. Imagine being able to buy one of those for that price right now. Yeah, $150,000 in 1940s dollars. There's a hand that, yes.
So, do
Mike.
you have any more comments about the Men in Black and the early issue about what
Read the
they
book.
found?
Not much, other than just that they threatened Mr. Dahl with, you better keep quiet about this, or it's going to have a very unfavorable outcome on you and your family. And that's kind of what I got out of it, but not a whole lot more.
A couple years ago, they had that show, Project Blue Book. They did a show on this. They go really in depth, but they show going out, not to Grove Valley, but going looking at the
Project Blue Book.
Yeah.
And that's on, what show was that on?
Either on Netflix or one of those.
Okay.
Just Air Force's investigation into UFOs.
Well, one thing also, this book was published by the people who run the Northwest Museum of Legend and Lore. So if you go to the Northwest Museum of Legend and Lore, you may find some more information on this.
It's closed.
Oh, it's closed? Okay. So,
Then you won't find any information.
so then you won't find any information on it. Yes.
So you said that there is a problem with the exhaust pipe in the left wing that caused the fire and caused the left to be separated. Did the Air Force have a track record? Because I know nowadays they keep records, like maintenance records and stuff. Did this airplane have a track record of being crud?
From what I had read, that both engines were replaced on this aircraft prior to this event, like very soon prior, like an hour and a half of flight time were on these engines, brand new. And so I'm wondering too that if they were installed and they were that fresh, that new, that if there was a problem with it, the problem showed itself up pretty quick. Just like whenever I'm on a commercial flight going somewhere, once I'm after that 20-minute mark while we're in the air, I figure we've most likely passed the period of time when something's going to happen until we get close to landing. Because most of the time when there's an incident with an aircraft, it's when it's going up or coming down. And so I'm always kind of like, well, if we made it past 20 minutes, anything that would happen probably would have happened with this aircraft, with these new engines that were installed on it. If there was something that wasn't, if there was something faulty on it or installed improperly, that's when it would happen. Because, you know, if the engine's been running for 100 hours and nothing happened on it, then the parts that would have fatigued through a fault of the engineering of the part or the manufacture of the part would have happened before, I'm guessing. I always trust things that have been flying a little bit longer. Like I don't like being on a brand new airplane. I don't want to be on a 30-year-old jet either, but a 10-year-old jet I think is good. Nice sweet spot. It's like you don't always want to buy the brand new model of car where they switch everything out and completely redesign. It's like, I don't know, let's wait until the next year and then we'll get it, so all the kinks get worked out. But I think those engines being so new and having been replaced may have played a role in that. Any other questions? Yes.
So the two servicemen that were in that plane, were they targeted to be killed in that, or was that just, they were just part of the plot?
I think if the plot of sabotage is a theory of going on,
Yeah.
I don't think the sabotage would have been to get the people piloting the aircraft more than to prevent the cargo from getting to where it needed to go,
Okay.
to cover up whatever was being covered up. So it didn't matter who the crew was on it, I'm assuming. I don't think it was like an angry ex-wife or somebody that
Right.
did something, or somebody that they had a fight with in the mess hall at the base that happened to be a mechanic that did something. Yeah.
I will point out that the two pilots were more than pilots. They were Army A2 investigators.
That's right. They were not just pilots. They weren't just ferrying the stuff back and forth. They were military investigators. They came up to investigate this account. So they were higher ranking, not just pilots. One of them had an extensive World War II experience.
Trained
Right.
investigators.
Hmm?
Trained investigators.
Trained investigators. Yes.
Another good book about this, which I just started reading a couple days ago. Kenneth Arnold wrote a book in 1952 called The Way of the Saucers. And I just started reading it a couple days ago, and looking into the story, I saw this talk was being given here tonight. I was like, oh, that's pretty synchronistic.
Yeah, its title is The Summer of the Saucers, I believe, which was carried over to cover the entire thousands of 1947 reports from coast to coast.
So Way of the Saucers or Summer of the Saucers?
Summer of the Saucers is the book I have.
Look for that book too.
Yeah,
as a period piece too, because it was written in 1952.
Yeah, and his granddaughter just republished it on Amazon. It's like $4 on Kindle. But he talks about this. He was actually paid, from his words, he was paid from the science fiction publisher to fly from Boise to Tacoma to look into this case. He was paid $200 back in 1952, and he called his friend Captain Smith of United Airlines to come over. And because he was talking with military intelligence after his sighting, that's when he called these guys from California to come up here.
It's just really a fascinating story how it all connects and the bizarre circumstances around this. Any other? Yes.
I have a question about the Maury Island incident. Were there any other known eyewitnesses that saw what happened other than the people on the boat? I'm not sure how far out you could see the boat or I don't really know the geography of there.
That was something I didn't ask that question when I was trying to find information on this, but it popped into my head is that, okay, if 6 of these large discs are flying around by Maury Island, and you can see it clearly from Tacoma, and they're around that vessel, other vessels had to have been around there, other people had to have been around there to see it, unless there was cloud cover or something that could have prevented it. But I don't think there was any other documented eyewitness accounts other than the people on the boat. But that's a very good question, because you would think that something that big. He did say though that they made no sound and he couldn't see any sign of engine or means of propulsion on them, and that they were silent. So if people, that's a good one, because I don't know how many people lived in that area in 1947, but it was fairly populated back in those days too.
What happened to the quote unquote papers that fell into the water that they retrieved? What happened to those?
The papers were what they determined was they thought it was a very thin, light colored metal.
Where are they now?
Probably on the water, on the floor of the commencement bay.
They took some of those. They took obviously samples or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Were those what was on the plane?
That's what I'm thinking is that that's on the plane, but also if they took stuff off of the boat, and there was stuff on Maury Island, and there was also some accounts that the government had some fenced off areas on Maury Island that you couldn't go through, possibly because of whatever dropped there. But if you have your boat and you got stuff on it and you're going to show the government the stuff that you found, wouldn't you possibly have a little bit that you're kind of saving off to the side? Because I would. I wouldn't show them everything I had. I'd say, here's a bunch of the stuff. Is that all you found? Yeah, that's all I found.
So where's the stuff that he could have kept off to the side for the government?
Unless he was scared not to talk about it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's in a shoebox in the attic in Tacoma somewhere. But that's a good question too. Is where would all this material be if his whole deck, and if his boat was confiscated? Is there any documentation of that or account of that? Did that vessel disappear after this? And that's not even covered in the book. Is what happened to his vessel afterwards? Because I would think if a man in black showed up and they said, "You're not going to talk about this to anybody, and here's $50,000 in cash, and by the way, your boat is being towed away right now out of the harbor."
80 years worth of scuba divers too. Has anybody found anything?
I don't think so. I do know it's very murky down there. That whole Commencement Bay area and over by the Tacoma Narrows, it's extremely murky and very low visibility there.
Do you think somebody in 80 years might have found something?
A random tidbit, by the way, on the Tacoma Narrows, the bridge that collapsed. Divers that have been down there say it's really weird because when it collapsed, basically the bridge is a freeway, and this freeway collapsed and lands into the water, and there's sections of it where you could walk on, and it's like there's this freeway underwater that's submerged. It's just sitting there, just huge chunks of it. But that's a whole nother story. Yes.
So I recently listened to an interview with the filmmaker of the Maury Island Incident that you mentioned. And apparently when they were making the film about 10 years ago, they did a lot of FOIA requests and got a lot of FBI records declassified. Apparently, Dahl said this was a hoax, which made a lot of people discredit the story over history. But the filmmaker was really interested in the story 10 years ago and made this film because he was led to believe from his investigation that he said it was a hoax to kind of make the problem go away. So apparently there's a lot of these FBI files out there you can look for. I haven't looked for it yet.
Is the producer of that film, are they Northwest oriented? Do they live?
Yeah, he's an entertainment lawyer in, I think, near Seattle.
Okay. Be interesting if I can contact him and see what information he has, because he's done a lot more research than I've been able to do to make that movie.
I can give you his name. I just have to look on my phone.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. That'd be wonderful. Yeah, I'd like to reach out to him. And there was a hand up in the back there. Yes.
You briefly mentioned that, Hanford, right?
Yes.
Did the Air Force ever, investigate that as to, what the flying doohickeys were dropping all this stuff?
Yeah, well, if the Air Force, I don't think so, because they may have wanted to keep it under wraps if it was an experimental aircraft or if they were illegally dumping radioactive material into Puget Sound inadvertently. You would think that they would want to investigate, but if they were part of the problem, if that's what it was, then maybe not, especially if they're telling people to shut up about it. And if they investigated, it might be in the other set of books that they have for public record, not the set that we get to look at. But that's, and the interesting thing too is I was looking at maps of UFO sightings in 1947, and they started up here in Washington, and they kind of tracked down towards New Mexico, most of them, and then they start going all over the country. But there's this kind of an arc from New Mexico to Washington State, and you have Roswell down there and Hanford here, and so.
Manhattan Project down there as well, in New Mexico. Manhattan.
Yeah, that.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because Los Alamos, New Mexico. What was the name of it? The Trinity Project and all that. Yeah. So but those are all nuclear relations, Hanford and Los Alamos.
Be interesting to look and see if there was anything in that time in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Mhm.
That was like the third, like the triad, the
Mhm.
three locations of.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Thank you all for coming tonight, and thanks for your patience while we were trying to get our technology working. And if you have any other tidbits of information, please reach out to us. And I don't have my business cards on me. Joanna, could you grab my business cards, please, from my office and give them to anybody who wants a card? Because I'd love to hear any contacts that you have so we can get more information about the story, because it is a local connection to a larger story, I think, that's out there.